Hey everyone, welcome back to another video. My name is Emma Lefebvre and today we are going to be painting some loose florals with inexpensive watercolor materials. I'm going to be using Canson watercolor paper and Winsor Newton COTMAN student grade watercolor paints, and I'm just going to go over some of the issues you may run into as a beginner with these materials, how to fix them, and how to turn it into something beautiful. Let's jump right in. Okay, so for our first low budget watercolor challenge, I am going to be using Canson watercolor paper. It's cold press. It is 140 pounds. It is not the greatest paper, but it's what I started with and it's what a lot of beginners start with. So we're going to be using this today. I just cut it down into a smaller sheet because I have the very large pad. I also just had a separate little piece just so we can mix some colors and come up with a color palette. For paints, we're going to be using Winsor Newton COTMAN paints. They are student grade watercolors. They are what I started with after the cheap Artist Loft palette that I had. These are great because they do last a long time. And what I do is I get a palette like this off of Amazon. I do have it linked below, maybe not this exact one, but it's always changing on Amazon. And I place them in my palette. I squeeze the tube out in my palette and I let it dry overnight. This is great for beginners because it lasts a lot longer that way. Also, if you're using it straight out of the tube as a beginner, you're more likely to pick up more paint and waste it. You actually don't need as much as you think. So I definitely recommend putting it in your palette and letting it dry overnight. But I love these Winsor & Newton COTMAN colors. These are the paints that I started out with, and you don't need every single color. I ended up buying a lot later on. I have some more colors here that I taped off because we're only using these 4 colors for this challenge. The colors are cadmium red deep hue, cadmium yellow hue, turquoise, and permanent rose. These are the 4 that I suggest starting out with. And you can always build on your collection later, but they're great watercolors, and yeah, that's what we're going to be using today. They also come in different sizes. I have some of the bigger tubes because I was using these for workshops that I was planning on doing, then it didn't happen, but these are the only ones I have at the moment. Okay, and brush wise, I have my Craftamo brushes. They are not the cheapest brushes I have, I don't think, but again, it depends on what region you are because this is a UK company, so these might be cheaper than trying to find the Princeton snap brushes that I always used to use. So really, brushes, wherever you have them, wherever you can get them, it's totally an individual thing, so use whatever brush you have. I like using round brushes, and I have a size 10 here and a size 8. And a size 6. I don't even know if I'm going to be using them all. I'm probably just going to use the one. But what I love about these brushes is I love that they're very stiff and they have a good snap, and I love the point on them. That's kind of my criteria for brushes. So I'm going to be using these today, but use whatever brushes you have available to you. Okay, so now let's begin. So I'm going to show you today how to do some loose watercolor florals on Canson paper with cheaper paints, because it can be kind of tricky to paint on this paper without getting frustrated. It's not as easy to work as it is on higher quality paper. I've said it many times, paper is probably the most important supply, but if this is all you have access to right now or can afford, that is totally cool, and I'm just going to show you how to get the most out of it to create something beautiful. Okay. So the first thing we want to do is we want to come up with a color palette. So let me just swatch the colors that we have first. As you can see, this is not dry. What we have, here, let's move this down. We have permanent rose, we have cadmium yellow, cadmium red deep, and make sure you're getting deep, not cadmium red, because it's an orangey tone, the cadmium red. Cadmium red deep is more of a nice deeper red. And then turquoise. Turquoise is just my preference of blue. There's many different blues. Ultramarine is a nice warm blue. It's a good option. But personally, I just like turquoise. So those are the 4 colors we're gonna work with. So let's come up with a color palette. So I really love working with pinks and like oranges and peaches. So we're going to mix a peach color or maybe like a coral color. So I'm just going to grab my permanent rose, put it in my palette, Gonna grab some cadmium yellow. And we have kind of like this corally color. We could add more pink and make it a bit more pinky. Okay, yeah, I like that color. And then you could always water it down and make it lighter. Okay, in watercolor, you can add white watercolor, but I just like to add water to make a hue lighter. Okay, and then let's mix our greens. So I kind of like this vibe, maybe with some just plain yellow with it too. And let's mix our greens. So I'm gonna take some turquoise, wash off my brush. I'm gonna grab some yellow, and turquoise and yellow are gonna make this pretty vibrant green. Now, I don't know if I want it to be that vibrant. So what I'm actually gonna do is I'm gonna add a little bit of red to mute it. Okay, maybe a bit more yellow. I want kind of like an olivey green, and I'm putting green into my yellow. That's okay, I do that all the time. A bit more red, like that. And there we go. Now, if I wanted to make a darker green on top of that, let's mix our green again. I'm gonna try and get some of this green off this yellow. Okay. Yellow, blue, and let's add pink this time. That's a bit too purpley, so we need to add a bit more blue, a bit more yellow. There we go, there's a darker green. Just slightly. Add a bit more blue. And there we go. And that's pretty good for a color palette. I have two different types of greens and some pinks and peaches, and I'm gonna add some yellow, and there we go. Okay, if you are interested in more color mixing tips, I have a whole playlist on color mixing, like tons and tons of videos on it. So I suggest you go through and check that out for some of the basics and then some more intense stuff. It's a lot of fun to do. It's one of my favorite things to do. Okay, so let's start with our coral color here, and we're gonna do a rose right here in the center. So I picked up some pigment, and I'm just gonna start off with the tip of my brush going in small little curvy circles. And then I'm gonna slowly do some larger curves going around, not too big, but just slightly larger. Okay, and I'm just using light pressure, heavy pressure, light pressure to get these curves. Now, the problem with Canson paper is that it dries too quickly, and the pigment and water sit on top of the paper, which ends up creating those blooms like I talked about in my last video. So looking right now, I can see this is starting to dry. There's a little puddle here. This is pretty wet. There's a little dry area here. It's gonna dry at a different rate and give you those blooms. If you do not want those blooms, when you do this, what you have to do is go back over the whole area again to try and make it evenly wet. Like that. Okay, and if there's still too much pigment in one area maybe, or too much water, and you can see it starting to pool a little bit, dry off your brush on your paper towel and pick it up. Okay, and that will help with those blooms. Okay, let's continue. So we're gonna make some larger curves. Going around, I need a bit more water on my brush. And we're just doing loose ones, okay? So don't make it too perfect, don't worry about it. Larger curves. Gently touching some of those previous curves. Okay. Be cautious of your petals. Are they all the same amount of wet? Are they starting to dry at different rates? Go over some of the areas and try to spread out that water if you don't want those blooms. Right here, I notice it's starting to dry a bit. I'm gonna go over it and make sure it's all the same level of wetness. Okay. And then I keep adding water to my brush to make the value lighter of the outer petals, okay? So I'm just gonna do some shorter, puffier petals here. Okay, and I don't mind a lot of like watercolor blooms. I think it adds a bit of texture, especially if you're doing loose flowers. We're not doing something that's real or like realistic looking, so just kind of go with it. If there's a bit of blooms here and there, that's totally fine. Okay, we're just making some like that. Okay, I'm seeing blooms starting to happen here. You can get rid of them, you can keep them. It's totally up to you. If you want to get rid of them, again, just go over that whole area. But really, it's not the worst thing in the world. Usually what I'd like to do is go over the center with a bit more darker pigment to make it a bit deeper. It is a little bit harder to do that with this paper because you will get those blooms. I'm just gonna see if I can, yeah, it's not looking as natural as it would on arches, but I'm just gonna add some. And if the underneath is already really dry, you can just wet up the area again. But I mean, this looks fine, okay? Okay, let's get some greenery happening. I'm gonna grab my light green and I'm just gonna go in there and create some leaves. Okay, like that. And they don't have to be perfect either. Now, this is another area where you're gonna get those blooms. You can see this is light, there's a little puddle here, puddle here. You're gonna get those funky marks if you don't move it around. So move all that pigment around, try and make it evenly wet. Okay, you can always dry off your brush and pick up some of that pigment as well. Actually, I'm gonna create another little flower here. So I'm gonna re-wet this area because I want a bit of a color bleed from a flower down below. Okay, so I'm re-wetting that area. Add a little bit of yellow to this mixture to get more of a peach color. And then I'm just gonna do like some curvy petals for like maybe a peony that's opening down here. And see how it's bleeding into that one? There's not really like a sharp line. That's because I re-wet the area and then gently touched it. Sorry if there's a glare. It's my lighting, but you'll see it better when it's dry. So this peony's kind of pointing down and I'm just being really, really loose with it. This is also a good way to see if you have that glare, what areas are drying faster than others. So you can go over it and re-wet the areas that are drying too fast. Okay, might go in, add a bit more pigment. I'm gonna grab a bit more yellow, a bit more pink. Tap in some darker bits. Okay, try not to have too much water in your brush because if you go in and try and add a bit more darker areas and you have too much water in your brush, the water is going to push all that pigment away and create those blooms as well. Okay, let's get this dark green coming from this one. And I want a little bit of a color bleed from the dark green into the pink. See that? Now sometimes it can go right, sometimes it can go wrong, and too much pigment bleeds in and it looks a little weird. It's okay, you can always just mop it up, like I'll show you. Mop it up with your paper towel. Okay. I'm just gonna add some more here. Wash off your brush, grab that color again, that peachy color, and just go over that area if you need to. But again, I just added more water there. This is a bit more drier. You're gonna get a little weird kind of funky bloom. My opinion, it's okay. It's not the worst thing in the world. That's why it is so tricky to work on this paper, but it is possible. Again, we're having areas over here. It's drying here, still wet there. You're gonna get a funny mark there. It's okay though. I kind of like the way sometimes that looks. So it's totally up to you if it's a problem or not. Okay, let's do another little, I would have liked to put a flower there, but that's okay. I'm gonna grab a bit more pink, a bit more yellow, and maybe we'll do, oopsie, too much yellow. It's all good. A brighter one coming from behind here. Just curvy petals. And see, that's dry, so it's not bleeding into that. That's okay though. Just trying to blend out that little yellow mark there. Okay, like that. And again, I'm just doing some loose leaves. And I'm gonna leave some of them. I'm not gonna go over it and make it all evenly. I kind of want some of those blooms. I kind of like the way it looks. And also try and make your leaves a little bit more like jagged. Just be messy with it. Don't worry so much about making the perfect shape for these leaves. Let's mix all this green together, get another shade. See what happens. Just getting really messy with it and just using that shape of my brush to go light pressure, heavy pressure, light pressure. Little stem. Okay. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to wash off my brush a bit, and I'm going to just start using a really, really light wash of it. And I know it doesn't look like much now, but once it dries, you'll see that wash a bit more, and it just looks like they're kind of like faded leaves. Add a little bit more yellow to this. Wash up some of it off. Just get these really light leaves, and it kind of frames it nicely without being too overwhelming. Again, I'm just being super, super loose with this. Just dabbing my brush using the shape of that brush. Okay. I'm gonna wash off my brush. There's a lot of yellow there. I'm gonna grab a bit more of that pink. Just dab it there. Okay. Now let's get some smaller leaves in there just to kind of give it a different contrast of large and small leaves. So see some of these blooms happening here? I don't mind the way that looks, especially with loose watercolor florals. I think it kind of gives it a bit of character, so it's totally up to you. Let's create, oops, let's get a bit more yellow. My yellows are always dirty, but I'm fine with that. Yellow, blue, let's do red. Well, let's mix a bit of pink in there too. There we go. And I'm just using the tip of my brush and creating these kind of like small leaves. Someone messaged me asking how to use or how to make small leaves. You can use a smaller brush, or you can just use the tip of your brush. So when we did these bigger leaves, we were fully pressing down on the belly of our brush like this. To make smaller ones, don't fully press down, just a little bit. Okay, and it makes smaller leaves. Okay, we're just using the tip of our brush to gently press down. Not a lot, okay? Lighter pressure. And again, we're just making it really loose and kind of messy. Just using the tip of that brush, going different directions. I actually don't know if I like that, but it's fine. You can add it, you can not add it, totally up to you. Okay, maybe I'll add just a few petals of pink too in there. Really, really light. Grab a little bit of green. Give some of those a stem. Like maybe they're buds or something. Like that. And there we go. And then last but not least, we're just going to do the center of these peonies. So I'm just going to grab some yellow, bring it over here. And just again with the tip of our brush, like we did for these small leaves, you're just going to create these kind of teardrop shapes. Like that. You can do a little line and then the shape if you want. Like that. And there you go. There is our loose floral painting on Canson paper with COTMAN paints. Thank you all so much for watching my video. I really hope you liked it and I hope you learned something. Don't forget to subscribe to this channel and follow me on Instagram for even more. Have a great day, guys. Bye.